I heard it. We're recording.
Okay. Oh, we've got a good crowd here. Hi, Dr. Jeannie. So it would be really helpful for us if you all put into the chat, you know, kind of where you're from, because we have mostly people from our area, but we got people from all over. So that would be interesting to us and to our speakers. I want to put in the chat while we're waiting to bring in all the new people. Sonoma, Oakland, Merced, Modesto, Stockton, Modesto. I'm just reading Lodi, Turlock, Stevenson, Rio Vista. I'm reading this for our speakers. Springville. Okay, so we're going to start now. And my name is, my name is Cynthia Chipaldos, and I organize these webinars for the our chapter, which is North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the Native Plant Society. And this is the 21st event. We hold them every second Monday in the month of December. So we have two great speakers today. It's Diego Garcia and Claudia Delgado, and they're associate restoration scientists with River Partners. They're going to tell you all about them, the restoration, and a bit about River Partners, which is a really amazing organization that is doing terrific ecological work. So they'll talk about restoring this floodplain, which has now been turned into the newest state park in California, Dos Rios State Park. I went to the opening event and I went to some tours. It's right 8 miles from Modesto. It's perfect for us. Okay, so we just got a little bit of intro stuff. So I'm doing the little overview here, and then Mike's going to talk about our chapter about CNPS in general. And then our speakers will take the rest of the meeting with some room for questions. And what we ask you to do is put your questions in the chat, and then at the end, Mike will read them to our speakers. There's been a lot of webinars. There's been 20 so far. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of these. At least two of our former speakers are here, Dr. Jeannie and Madeline. But you know, if you go to the YouTube channel, you can find them all. We do a lot of kind of eclectic amount of presentations, mostly stuff that I'm really interested in. This was the last one before this. It was all about the, you know, the Great Valley and how it came to be and all the incredible animals that used to be here. So of course we got our webinar we're going to talk about right now, but we've got quite a few scheduled already for the future. So the one in September is going to be Kathy Kramer, who is the founder and manager of this fantastic garden tour in the East Bay, Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour. And then in October, we're going to have a presentation about indigenous people's use of California native plants, which should be very, very interesting. And then in November, we're going to have part 2 of reliable California native plants for a garden with no irrigation. So part 1, that was our second presentation, and he had so much material he couldn't finish. So this is going to be part 2. And then in January, we already have something scheduled, which is the status of Mexican native plants. And this isn't probably the final title, but so, you know, there is a chapter in Baja California, the Baja chapter, which is actually in Mexico, and that's part of our floristic province. So we're also very interested in that area. And the other thing that I would like to do this 2025 is hold 2 webinars in Spanish. As some of you may know, 40% of California residents are Latino and 50% of the children. So it's really important to reach this group and let this group have speak at our webinars and get involved. So I would, if what I'm hoping is we can hold the webinar in Spanish and then somehow have Zoom translated. I don't know if that's possible. But anyone who's interested in helping me do this, please, you can email me, or where's my email? It's at the beginning, or you can just put it in the chat. Okay, I talked about this. We have, there's our channel, and North San Joaquin Valley, CNPS media. We're building a following here. We're happy with that. This is just kind of rehashing some of the things I already told you, but this is my email address, cynthia.ca.nativeplants@gmail.com. The dot isn't important, but that's my email. So the second Monday evening each month, no webinars in December. The next one is September 12th. I already did this, right? Wait a minute, I'm going to do like this here. Yeah. All right, so my next slide is the introduction. So I'm done here, and Mike's going to take over. Mike?
Hi. Okay, so I put something in the chat already. Basically, it's a few things that are I'll be talking about. And what I wanted to do was to introduce you to our chapter, the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. California Native Plant Society is a statewide organization, and you can join it for a regular individual membership of $50 to receive the Flora and Artemisia magazines, get benefits such as discounts at different certain nurseries, sales, and things like that, and the ability to join 2 different chapters of CNPS. If you'd like to join the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and one other, such as the Santa Clara Valley chapter, the Sacramento chapter, or others, it will be an option when you go to the link on the slide, which is cnps.org/membership. And we hope you join us here on the North San Joaquin chapter and whichever other chapters you feel a kinship with the regular membership link is right there, cnps.org/membership. Remember that this is the link to join up. And we have a quarterly newsletter sharing articles about our CNPS and our local native plants and events. And I should point out, we intend to do everything by email. We recognize that there are some people who actually prefer US mail, and for those who are inconvenienced, we do apologize, but we don't yet have the financial or volunteer base to put the newsletter out that way. CNPS has asked us all chapters to find ways of reducing carbon and saving all that paper is one of our contributions. If this is a true problem, let us know, but so far, no one has complained. If you are on our mailing list, our email list, you should have received our newsletter. We want our newsletter to go out to everyone. That's our mission, to promote native plants around our region. And our best way of doing that is to keep native plants on everyone's mind through events and presentations and gardening. So you want to keep those of you who haven't joined the statewide organization in the loop, so that perhaps you can join us for an event or two and remind you that we are here. Speaking of events, I wanted to tell you about this month's field trip. It's a series of field trips. Coming up is the continuation of our Bug Walks field trip series. Location is at we're meeting at the parking lot 11 south of Naragi in Stanislaus State and in Turlock, California. The host of these events is August Frisk. And join us for a fascinating bug walk and discover the lesser appreciated wildlife of insects and spiders. Our expert host, August Frisk, will guide us through the identification, ecology, and life history of these incredible critters. Whether you're a seasoned entomologist or just curious about the tiny creatures around us, this walk is perfect for all ages and interest levels. Don't miss the unique opportunity to learn more about small wonders of nature right here at Stan State. Bring your curiosity, comfortable walking shoes, and maybe a magnifying glass to get an up close look at these amazing bugs. See you there. And why care about native plants? We are finding out more and more each day that about the true need to restore our environment as much as we can. The man who's been trying to explain the need for native plants with the most eloquence is Doug Tuolumne, a professor from Delaware. He's written several books on this subject, all of which circle around the theme that we have been damaging the environment dramatically, but that there is hope in native plants. 95% of all birds feed insects to their young. Caterpillars are an important component of that diet, and caterpillars cannot live on non-native plants with few exceptions. Native plants are critical to the ecosystem, and a backyard with no native plants, and that is a devastatingly high percentage of them, are ecological dead zones. Planting native plants in your yard helps moths, butterflies, native bees, and other pollinators, and therefore birds, and the web goes on and on. Our cities need not be devoid of butterflies, moths, and native bees. For more information about this, you can watch a 1-hour video that knocked me over like a brick. This was a talk sponsored by our local Audubon chapters. Just this, well, it was a couple of years ago now. The link is in the chat. And if you have any questions during the, I just lost my place here. If you have any questions during tonight's presentation, please add them to chat. We'll do all the questions in the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia, and I will be in chat for those with questions or comments.
Okay. I'm trying to find the. There it is. I want to say someone just asked why we have the video turned off for the participants. I honestly don't know why, and I don't know how to turn them all on. I'm going through individually.
It's actually distracting to have. I mean, some people like literally pick up their laptops and carry them through the house and stuff.
Yeah, I understand that, but let's
videos on.
Let's just try it because we did get a request, and people don't have to turn it on. So let's just this is an experiment. And at the end, we'll decide if you liked it or not. Okay, so the next point, though, is I'm going to introduce our speakers, Diego Garcia and Claudia Delgado. I met both of them in person at various events. They're associate restoration scientists at River Partners. These are pictures, of course, of the park. And this is what I found the best map of kind of showing where it is. You know, here's the Tuolumne coming in, and here's the San Joaquin. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they'll tell us more about themselves and the park and the restoration. You guys want to take
Thank you,
over?
Cynthia. Yeah, thanks, Cynthia, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'll be sharing my screen, and we could get started with the presentation. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you guys for joining. I know it's a little bit later in the day, so I appreciate you all making the time. My name is Diego Garcia, as Cynthia said, and I am a restoration biologist with River Partners. I graduated from the University of California, Davis, and I've been with River Partners for about 8 months now, so not too long. I'm still learning quite a lot, but I am originally from a small farming community in the Southern Central Valley, a small town called Porterville. I saw somebody here that's from Springville, so I'm curious as to if that's the Springville that's right above Porterville. But yeah, so it's a very small farming community. I didn't grow up with a lot of natural spaces around me, and it wasn't until I got to college and high school that I sort of started going on adventures and discovering sort of what California has to offer in terms of natural spaces on my own. And through that, I sort of discovered a love for environmentalism and also environmental justice. So my drive for doing restoration and being in this field sort of stems from a lens of environmental justice and protecting both the climate and the communities that are most impacted by environmental injustices. I'm very excited for this position. I'm still fairly new. I graduated last spring. And I'll turn it over to Claudia so she can say a little bit about herself as well.
Yeah, just to echo what Diego said, thank you all for coming out. My name is Claudia. I've been with River Partners for almost 3 years now. Like Diego, I come from a very small town here in the Central Valley. I saw somebody actually said they were from there, Stevenson. I grew up in Stevenson. But even with having the refuge just 5 minutes away from my home, I didn't grow up going to the refuge or knowing about it. It was only until, honestly, like I started working with River Partners that I was able to explore the refuge in depth. I've definitely been out there a lot this summer. But yeah, my growing up, I had my dad did cattle fences. So he traveled a lot to mountainous areas. He would take us out when we were younger with him. And I think that's, to me, when really opened my eyes to like, wow, like if this is a career where I could be outside and enjoy nature and make it better, it's definitely something I would like to do. So I went ahead and got my bachelor's from environmental studies from Sonoma State. Came back home because I graduated in 2020. So during the pandemic, nobody was hiring. I came back here to no surprise, a lot of the jobs that were available were related to agricultural practices, ag business. So finding River Partners wasn't too hard since there's a small number of conservation work being done in the Central Valley specifically. But yeah, like I said, I've been with River Partners for almost 3 years. So I was able to see the tail end of the restoration work that was implemented at Dos Rios before it transitioned over. And yeah, we're just excited here to present you hopefully some new information about Dos Rios.
I want to give you guys a brief outline of how the presentation will go, just to get you guys oriented. So we're going to start off by giving you guys a brief introduction to who River Partners is and the work that we do, not just locally, but at the state level as well. We'll move on to talking a little bit about the historic conditions of the site at Dos Rios, and then we'll go into the meat of the presentation, talking about the actual restoration of the site. And we'll have some time at the end for questions that you guys might have.
So the organization that Diego and I are part of is called River Partners. It is a nonprofit that was established in 1998 in Chico, California by 2 farmers. So we've carried with us their farming techniques and incorporated it, and that has allowed us to do large-scale restoration. As an organization, we envision interconnected, thriving floodplains that sustain abundant wildlife, enhance surrounding communities, and serve as a first line of defense in the changing climate. In these last 25 years, we've been able to restore over 18,000 acres across the riparian corridor in California's waterways. And like we have it in our name, our partners play a big role, have played and continue to play a big role in allowing us and helping us to do this restoration work across the state.
So as Claudia mentioned, we work across the state. We are a statewide organization. From our small beginnings in Chico, we have expanded to all over the state, from Chico all the way to San Diego. And we have offices in Chico, Sacramento, in Modesto, that's where Claudia and I are based out of, and in San Diego as well. This diagram on the left, you can see that the majority of our work is based in the Central Valley. Historically, this has been one of California's most degraded landscapes, especially concerning rivers. So there is a lot of work for us to do here. But it just goes to show just how widespread our distribution of our projects is. And through, as Claudia mentioned, through partnerships, we have been able to expand from just the Chico office to over 20 watersheds. And along with that, we have been able to work with a variety of research universities and other research organizations such as UC Merced, Stanislaus State, and Stanford to sort of quantify and better understand the impacts that our projects have on our ecosystems. So with that, we've sort of quantified the results and have put numbers to those pictures. We've restored and replanted over 4 million native trees and other vegetation. We've captured over 1 million tons of greenhouse gases, and we saved over 10 billion gallons of water across our projects. And here is one of our projects down south in the San Bernardino area. This is called the San Dieguito project. It gives you a good overview of how we implement our projects using agricultural practices. You can see the rows and how neat the trees are planted. Yeah. So River Partners works under a holistic model of restoration. We work under the motto of doing these projects not only for the benefits of wildlife and the plants, but also of the communities that we work with. Here on the right, you can see a few key species that we target here in the Central Valley specifically. At Dos Rios, we did quite a bit of work for the riparian brush rabbit, which is a state and federally listed species. That included catering our planting design to create habitat for the species. And then as in terms of working for the communities, this is one of our projects in the Modesto area as well. It is called the Grayson Riverbend Preserve. You can see the footprint of the project here on the map. You can see that it borders the San Joaquin River and then the small town of Grayson. These are our fields that are currently planted, and we're still doing quite a bit of work out there. And then this is in the past atmospheric rivers that we had in 2023. You can see just how flooded this entire area gets. And you can see that a few of our fields are completely underwater. And so we do these restoration projects in the hope that the river will have a wider area to flood and create better water quality for the towns surrounding it, as well as giving the community around it a place to recreate in the summer. And it really ties into our motto of working to connecting and improving communities.
So to zoom out a little bit, here in the purple, we have the footprint of Dos Rios Ranch. As some of you may know, Dos Rios transfers to two rivers. In this image, we can see where the Tuolumne and the San Joaquin River are the two rivers that converge at the Dos Rios site, giving us 8 miles of river frontage for us to enjoy in the future when we go out and visit this new state park. Down under, you can see one of the current projects that is under implementation right now, our Hidden Valley branch restoration. And with this zoomed out view, we're able to see how essentially these two projects are turning into little puzzle pieces and joining with the work that the refuge has done in creating the Central Valley's largest contiguous floodplain area. So zooming in a little bit more to Dos Rios now, it is the largest public-private floodplain restoration in California's history as of now. It's been 18 years in the making, and that's starting from, oh, this property might be up for sale to finally implementing the last projects. We have some staff in our org that have been here through those 18 years, so they are definitely a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Dos Rios. And including the remnant patches that were left from when Dos Rios was previously a floodplain, We've restored about 16,000 acres of floodplain sites on site and planted over 350,000 native plants and shrubs at Dos Rios. And this is just an image of the confluence of the Tuolumne and the San Joaquin River that can actually be accessed via some roadways.
So before we start talking about the actual restoration process, I want to give a little bit of historical background of the site that would eventually become Dos Rios State Park. This is an image from 1937. You can see the Tuolumne River on the north and the San Joaquin River on the east. You can see that this is still a quite pristine, for the most part, riparian floodplain. There's still quite a bit of stands of riparian vegetation, along with oxbow lakes and ponds, and not a lot of agriculture yet. Moving forward to 1950, you can see that that's starting to change quite a bit. You see some agriculture starting to move in. This is all pre-restoration still, but you can see that some of the land has been leveled to make room for those ag fields. You can see some of the stands of riparian vegetation have been removed, and you can see just overall changes to the topography of the site. So this is what the site looked like in 2004. You can see that it's changed quite a bit from 1950. We no longer have stands of riparian vegetation throughout the site. It's mostly contained to the edges of the rivers and the sloughs. You can see that a lot of the oxbow lakes have been removed or changed heavily, and the land has been completely leveled for the agriculture. You can also see here, it's quite faint, but you can see that there has been a levee that has been installed pretty much across the entirety of the site, and that heavily changed the flood regime of the entire site. So this is what sort of we started out with at the beginning of this project, and it's the slate that we worked off of. And to give more context to the site and some concerns that we had at the beginning, here on the right, you can see some historic data of the discharge at the San Joaquin and the Tuolumne rivers before and after damming. The blue is the before the dam was built, and the red is after. You can see that before the dam was built, the discharge at the river was quite dynamic throughout the year. There were large amounts of discharges in the spring and summer months, and in the winter, the discharge was a lot lower. You can see that after the dam, the discharge pattern is more controlled, and the same is true for the Tuolumne River to an extent. And of course, we do all these projects in the context of changing climate. This graph shows a model of the annual average maximum temperatures in the Modesto area under different emission scenarios. The blue is under a medium emission scenario, and the purple is under a high emission scenario. And you see that regardless whether it's medium or high emissions, there will be a change in the average maximum temperature in the area, which just goes to show that it's now more than ever important to do these restoration projects, especially as the climate changes, the severity of extreme weather events like droughts are going to get worse. So it's important to sort of mitigate against that and invest more in these sort of restoration projects.
So before we're able to start any earthwork at Dos Rios, we have a planning and design phase, which is the time where we take into consideration what some of the things that like Diego just talked about right now, the historical background of the site as well as the current site. So when we went ahead and looked at Dos Rios as to what we could potentially create there. We had a reference site just across the river at the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge that has existing riparian corridors and pockets. So having that and the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge as reference sites allowed us to envision what Dos Rios could turn into and use those sites as models for our restoration work. Like Diego mentioned, hydrology is an important aspect to understand both historically and currently, just to help us get an idea of what the site will look like if we ever do have a big flood event, water event. How will the water move across the site? Like I mentioned, current site conditions is something that we also take into consideration. Diego showed us some beautiful maps of the transition of this riparian area that we had to work with. And we saw that a lot of the spaces that had riparian vegetation ended up being constricted into small areas. So we went ahead and also looked into those sites as to how can we incorporate more to those locations, how can we expand on them, and again, as reference sites. Soil types is another thing that we look into. This will help us determine what kind of plant species, what kind of different communities we can plant all across the site. And one of the biggest things, of course, is during the planning of Dos Rios was, what are the local plants available? As I mentioned, our reference sites and the existing condition sites offered, in a way, a lens into what this vast riparian ecosystem looked like. So really thinking about what species are already in the area. For us, it's really important to maintain the regional suitability of the plants. So going out and collecting from the nearby areas is what we went ahead and did and thought about when it came to thinking what we were going to incorporate at Dos Rios. Taking that into consideration and other factors is what helped create the Dos Rios restoration plan. And that's how we went about restoring different phases of Dos Rios at different times. So this is an overview of what our plant palette looks like. Like I mentioned, all these species are found here in the Central Valley, and they're specifically riparian adaptive plants. I do want to point out these two plants on the right-hand side. The one in the bottom, we have a button bush, and if you look closely, there's a little wooden stake that's sticking out. Those stakes are about a foot tall. And what you see here is a whole bunch of sand deposition that has happened post-flood at one of our restoration sites during last year's atmospheric rivers. And you can see the little button bush is thriving through almost a foot of sand. And then up on top, we have another one of our sites, a more mature plant, arroyo willow. That had been underwater for many months. And if you look closely, it looks like they may be like dead plants hanging off of the tree, but that's actually aerial roots. And this is something that willows, mule fat do in events where there's high flood waters. They, instead of drowning out because they can't, because the roots are all impacted with water and whatnot, they go ahead and start sending these aerial roots through their stems to help them survive the flood waters. So I think these are two pretty neat pictures that we've taken when we're out monitoring that really show you how adaptive these plants are to these riparian ecosystems, and hence why we include them in our planting. So the plants we showed you before were all overstory. Like I said, River Partners uses agricultural practices in the restoration work. So we go ahead and do our overstory, which include our trees and our shrubs in rows. And in between rows, we have aisles where our tractors essentially turn and whatnot. So then we're left with these aisles of barren land, right? So what River Partners noticed in the reference sites is that species like creeping wildfly, gum plant, and mugwort are really good at establishing in big areas. So what we went ahead and did is incorporate creeping wildfly. And can you push the space? So yeah, over the years, we learned that creeping wildfly is best established on site if it's drill seeded. And then if we move towards mugwort and gum plant, these species, their seeds are much smaller. So we again learned that drill seeding was not the best way to incorporate them in our aisles. So we go ahead and do that via broadcast seeding. So River Partners used these three main species as one, to incorporate more native diversity to our projects, but also as a way of a natural weed suppression because of, their tenacity to take over spaces. But over time, we've learned that we can't just stick to these three because that's not what you would find all the time out in our riparian ecosystems. So over the years, we've slowly started to do seeding experiments at our project sites. And we've started in the recent years to incorporate more mixes or incorporate what we call mixes into our aisles. Our creeping wildfly rose, since it is a grass, we don't go ahead and mix other species in there, but for our mugwort and gum plant rose, we have been, like I said, experimenting on what species can best coexist with each other, which ones will outcompete each other. So yeah, creating these seed mixes is allowing us to incorporate more diversity back into that seed bank, but as well as offering more nectar-rich sources for pollinators throughout the year.
So as Claudia mentioned, there has been a big push in River Partners to incorporate more diversity into our planting palettes. And to help us do that, we've sort of taken we've taken the initiative and created our own native CN plant supply company. It is called Heritage Growers. Heritage Growers is a venture of River Partners, and they have really helped us expand our planting palette to incorporate more local ecotypes of species into our projects. They help design the planting mixes, figure out which plants do best with each other and which plants do best for competing with invasives and whatnot. And they have really been a big part of this big push to increase the biodiversity on our planting sites.
So once we've worked with heritage growers and gone out and checked our reference sites, now it's time to really sit down and think about what can we incorporate in each field. We treat each field individually, and it's based on a couple things, the current infrastructure of the irrigation infrastructure, the soil types. So taking all these things into consideration is what helps us create the plant palette. The plant palette essentially is taking a lot of, like I said, the reference sites, but also our internal knowledge transfer of, a lot of internal knowledge transfer comes with really developing and adapting over the years these plant palettes. These plant palettes are never set. We're always changing them according to what we see out in the field. We have some staff that have been with us for over a decade. So they've seen how, they see that the oaks can't be planted next to the the blackberries, because the blackberries grow very fast and spread, as to where the oaks are very slow growing. So all these things that we've learned throughout the years have helped us create different plant palettes. We recently started venturing out into using the CNPS Vegetation Alliance as a framework. Again, we won't be able to replicate these sites to what they used to be before, But this framework that CNPS has created allows us to visualize what, if we want an area to be more of an oak woodland, like what should we incorporate? What should our plant palette look like for that field to look like that in the future? So yeah, essentially the cells that you're seeing there are what I see in my computer when I'm thinking of like, okay, what are we going to plant in this field? That in turn helps us print our plant labels. Each plant that we put out in the rows has an identifier that helps our field crews when they're out there planting, but as well as us when we go out and do monitoring. And like I've been saying, we use farming practices. So here you can see a tractor pulling our rows, and this has allowed us to do large scale restoration. Once we go ahead and come up with our plant palette is when our implementation happens. Our implementation consists of incorporating potted stock. Sorry. Potted stock, which we grow out from seed that's locally sourced. We also incorporate cuttings into our plants. For certain species that do well with cuttings, for example, cottonwoods are pretty good, and black willows, if you incorporate them via cuttings. And then for our understory, we also have staff out there collecting our native seeds. Like I mentioned, we use farming practices. So in the case of Dos Rios was being farmed. So we went ahead and used the existing irrigation infrastructure, you know, the head ditches. We went ahead and did flood irrigating, and in some places we went ahead and incorporated drip irrigation where flood irrigation wasn't possible. And I just want to point out this picture in the bottom kind of really gives you an idea of what River Partners aims to do. Let's see, the Tuolumne River is here on the right side, on the top right side. And like I said, this is one of our bigger fields out in Dos Rios that me and Diego have been monitoring. This whole week we're going to be out there monitoring. But essentially, it really gives you a good idea of, yes, we use farming practices, but at the same time, we're not creating these block chunks. We want to have our rows have some curvature, and that just gives it a little bit more of a naturalistic feel to them as opposed to straight rows, straight lines. If you see, there's a color variation. So we have our overstory that if you pay close attention, you can kind of see the little two greener rows, which is most likely our creeping wildrye, because our creeping wildrye covers really well, followed by 2 rows of gum plant. Gum plant is very hardy and very grows like in thickets, so that's why I assume that's our gum plant rows, and then followed by our 2 mugwort rows. And this is essentially just continued throughout the whole fields using our plant palette.
So after initial implementation activities, once the plants have been planted, once irrigation has been set up, some of the most common activities that we've been doing out there at Dos Rios include maintenance and monitoring. We maintain for weed management, and also for some of the fields that have been planted later on, we still do irrigation. For the most part, at Dos Rios, everything is flood irrigated. So we use the head ditches and pull water from the rivers to water the fields. Here you can see some of our staff disking the fields to manage for weeds. And then here you can see some of the staff doing more hand removal of the weeds. And in terms of monitoring, like Claudia mentioned, we've been out there this entire summer, and we will continue to be out there for a couple more weeks. doing different types of vegetation monitoring, including doing censusing of the plants and releves to see what plants are making up specific areas that we put out there, just to see like percent composition of different plants. And in different cases, we might do other sorts of monitoring to see how the plants are growing, or if they're not growing in some cases. These are some of our interns from this year doing some of that monitoring work. And the monitoring aspect is where Claudia and I are most heavily involved.
Going back to that first picture that I was describing earlier, this is a zoomed out version of what that field, we call it phase 4. So I'll refer to it as phase 4 for this slide. Again, the Tuolumne is running here on the right-hand side. 2021, we went ahead and implemented both our overstory and understory. So in 2022, you can see that in this case, like the grayish, greenish shade, that would be our mugwort rose. But definitely establishing after the first year of establishment, we had cottonwoods, easily over 6 feet tall. But it is interesting to see how the size of the different trees and shrubs fluctuates throughout the field. Finally, in 2023, during an atmospheric river, since this field is next to the Tuolumne River, when we had high flow events, this is a safe area where we were able to take on all this excess water and relieve some of the stress down the river or canals and whatnot. So something cool about Dos Rios is that in 2021, it was selected to be part of a statewide experiment on creating breeding habitat for monarchs. So we have 4 spots on Dos Rios, where we went ahead and incorporated narrowleaf milkweed in the form of plugs on the rows. And this was a project of 3 years where we were able to monitor, and with the help of Angela Laws from the Xerxes Society, we conducted sampling of the milkweed. What the monitoring consisted of was going out 3 times a year: early spring, early summer, and early fall. And we started off by doing milkweed stem counts, and then Angela trained us on how to do monarch monitoring. During the first year of the project, we saw no observations. However, during the second year of the project, when we went back to site, we were able to see just how much the milkweed had expanded. It wasn't just on the rows anymore, it was coming into the aisles now. And during that second year was pretty successful. Once the milkweed started establishing, we counted during our 3 monitoring events a total of 9 eggs and 32 larvae. During the 3rd year of monitoring, like y'all saw in the picture before, the site was under flooded, and that's where we had these experimental plots. So we were only able to go back for the late fall monitoring season. And during that time, we observed 1 adult monarch. So in the end, we were able to show that Dos Rios can indeed become monarch breeding habitat with the efficient time for establishment. The cool thing about this site is because we were able to plant the milkweed and irrigate it as we normally do our projects, when floodwaters came and the site flooded for 6 months, and after a couple of months, we went ahead and went back. You wouldn't have been able to tell like that the milkweed suffered like a huge flood event because it readily came up, as well as our other understory species like the milkweed, sorry, the mugwort and the gum plant.
So tying this back to the many reasons why we conducted restoration at Dos Rios, the native use garden is a great example of that. The native use garden is a small plot of land in Dos Rios that was set aside for the use of local indigenous tribes to access plants that they have otherwise been um, not able to access just because of like rarity of these plants or other reasons. So we're partnered with the California Native Basket Weaver Society, and we made this garden so that they could have a safe place to access these plants for different uses, for different cultural uses. And it ties back to the idea of creating these spaces, not just so they, could look pretty in pictures, but also for practical uses for the community. This is that said garden. On the left, you can see it um, a couple years ago. It is not that big of a site, but we did plant quite a lot out there. And unfortunately, during the last atmospheric rivers, this site was completely underwater and there was pretty high flows of water going through it as well. You can see here on this picture on the right that it's completely underwater, and on the left side of the picture, you can see water sort of rushing through the site. And because of this, we had a massive die-off of the plants that we had planted. But we did go back and replant, and we were out there not too long ago, and some of the plants that were replanted were doing quite well. And it's just a cool story of how dynamic these sites really are, and how you could plan for everything, but at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of these rivers. But still, it's a very hopeful sort of garden, and it represents a lot for both rare partners and the communities that we were working with to build it.
So just to wrap up, some of the lessons we've learned by implementing Dos Rios over the years, a lot of it has to do with the vegetation we're adding to our palettes. For example, species density when it comes to quail bush and coyote brush has been something we quickly learned the importance of being able to control and really understand when we're putting plants in the ground. Specifically, when it comes to quail bush, we do have one of the sites that we first started when we first started restoring Dos Rios. We saw that quail bush was a plant that we saw around the area often, and due to its high salinity tolerance, we thought it was perfect for this field because that field had saline soils. But what we quickly noticed within the year after is that the quail bush, just how aggressive quail bush can be in terms of expanding. Essentially, what we learned from this field was just the intensity of quail bush and how it can outcompete other natives. So then in turn, when we went ahead and incorporated the next field to it, we went ahead and adjusted and definitely decreased the amount of quail bush we incorporated from that project and on. Coyote brush is another one that we're really cognizant of how dense we're putting it into our planting palettes, because again, it grows pretty readily and it recruits pretty well. Understory seeding, we started seeding just 3 species, the 3 species that I talked about earlier. But again, we understand just how important it is to add native biodiversity back to the seed bank and in these areas for pollinators to have extended courses throughout the year. So that's something that we're actually still currently adapting and learning. And then as well as our plant palette, like I said, we never have one set plant palette. It's always changing and it's dynamic. Because the more we're able to learn from these restoration sites and how they transition over the years, how it changes is essentially what's helping us plan future plant palettes. And then one of, I think, the biggest lessons learned have been in regards to our bunny mounds, or what some people know as elevated refugias. These are done specifically because we saw there was a need for the riparian brush rabbit that is endemic to our area to seek refuge when in the event of high flood events. We have been doing this for over 10 years now, and I can definitely tell you that our bunny mounds have changed tremendously based on what we've learned throughout the years. The picture on the right is an image from a flood event from 2011. And essentially what bunny mounds are these elevated areas where riparian brush rabbit, other mammals and critters can come to in an event of a flood. What we learned during this 2011 flood was that our bunny mounds were too small and did not have enough vegetation. So over the years, we've gone ahead and learned the improvements that we can make. We've built them better, bigger now, and I think that just comes back to how adaptive we have to be, especially given these circumstances where we're able to do restoration at this scale. We have all these partnerships where we can do the research and do the changes needed in order to continue to build better structures for the animals we're creating these spaces for. Now the picture on the left is one of the most current bunny mounds that we have incorporated, and these bunny mounds are much taller, much larger, and have a higher density of vegetation. Both plants that the riparian brush rabbit specifically like to eat, like rose, but also others, so they can offer like shelter for them. But yeah, overall, River Partners is at a great place where we can be restoring at a large scale, but it's also important for us to keep track of how we're changing, and we're doing all this and taking into consideration what adaptive managements we can do to better the work that we're doing.
So in terms of our River Partners involvement today at Dos Rios, it is mostly maintenance and monitoring work. As I mentioned before, that's where Claudia and I are most involved. So things like weed removal and irrigation of the fields are what our grounds people are doing out there for the most part. For monitoring, like I said, we do a variety of vegetation monitoring just to see how the plants are doing. And then we've also started to monitor for different wildlife for other projects, but also just to inform of what's at Dos Rios currently. And yeah, so I didn't know there were deer out there before coming out to River Partners, and I didn't know there were beavers. And it's really cool to see these pictures that the cameras that we put out there are capturing of beavers and foxes and otters in some cases. Yeah. So today, Dos Rios has a new official name. It's called Dos Rios State Park. It is open to the public, and it has been since June 12th. I know that Cynthia was able to be at the opening ceremony. And beyond being a place of, for ag and for us to do all these experiments and try out different restoration techniques, it is now a place where the community can go out and enjoy nature. They have the opportunity to take part in a lot of activities that state parks holds, hiking, bird watching, picnicking, and attending events that they hold. These are some events that have happened recently and that are going to happen. So I encourage you all to go out there and check it out if you haven't already. It is quite different seeing these pictures, online, and then going out there and seeing what it actually looks like. It's quite more impressive when you're standing underneath the giant oaks and the cottonwoods. So I highly encourage you all to check it out if you have the opportunity. Here are some helpful links if you want to know about anything that we said today or that we discussed. If you want more information about River Partners or any of our close partners. We have a lot more partners than this, so shout out to them. But here are some of the more relevant ones. And with that, we will open up for questions. Thank you guys
Thank
for
you
your
so
attention.
much, guys. This was a great presentation. And but we were kind of dry for a while. Then I reminded everybody, hey, don't forget to put your questions in the chat. And boy, did they really came through for us. So we have a lot of questions for you. First of all, one of the things Cynthia noticed when she was there, she saw a lot of salt bush, and she was wondering if those were planted or did they plant themselves?
It really depends.
Also, let me just jump in because I can. I'm really confused. Is big salt bush the same thing as quail bush?
Yes. Yeah, Atriplex
okay,
lentiformis.
Huh?
Atriplex lentiformis.
I couldn't understand.
Well, she tried to give you the scientific name.
Oh, okay. I told you I planted that in my yard, and then it's big. And then I went out there and I saw they're like monstrous. And it was interesting you mentioned that they're very aggressive, huh?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Definitely gonna need a lot of maintenance if you want to, keep up with having some, but not letting it overtake your wherever you planted it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the ones you saw at Dos Rios, especially in the entrance areas, we did not plant those. So the recruits, they could have came from, when we initially did the planting that I talked about during the first years of restoring Dos Rios, but yeah, they recruit and they'll come up very readily.
Mars asks, with the extensive planting and weed pulling, how do you keep the soil safe and healthy?
Good question. I don't know of any current testing that we do regularly on site. What I can tell you is that compared to having these fields in ag as opposed to doing restoration work, there definitely is a huge decrease in any herbicide that we may use. As we mentioned, herbicide is used as a form of weed management, but it's, we need to keep track of when and where we spray. A lot of it is spot treatment, and it's essentially like our last resort if disking is not an option or if hand pulling is not an option. That's what I have for you.
Diana, apparently a neighbor came by to drop off zucchini and she missed. Maybe if you talked about the funding of River Partners, she was just hoping you could kind of go over how is it funded or things like that.
Yeah, we're a lot of it is state funded. So we have a team that applies for grants. They're on the lookout seeing what agencies are offering money for restoration work, as well as private funding.
Cool. Carolyn asked, do you have photos of an older restoration site that has been planted using the agricultural practices you've been describing? And how long does it take to no longer look like a planted field? Or is the intention for it to always look like basically a managed field.
Diego, jump in here if you want to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I know that at the refuge, we've had a project that I think one of our older projects is out at the San Joaquin National Wildlife Refuge. I'm not sure what the project name is. I think now it's just known as the refuge, but someone in the chat mentioned that that you can go out there. There's a hike that goes through that old restoration site, and you can see firsthand how it looks like now. We've been out there this year to do monitoring work, and I can tell you that you can still tell that it was once fields, but it is less noticeable. And just with the natural flooding that comes through the area, those berms and those rows that we created do eventually sort of just erode away. So it's not as noticeable, but you can tell that they were neatly planted, and it takes a while for the natural vegetation to sort of take over and make it look more natural than what we planted. But I would encourage you to look into the San Joaquin National Wildlife Refuge and check out some of the work that we've done there. You can probably find some stuff on the website.
And
Well, thanks. Yeah.
yeah, just to add to that, the plants that we incorporate, we really think of like how are these how is this planting going to look, in the long run. So by incorporating cottonwoods, we're able to cottonwoods are fast growing, so they provide the first resources, homes and whatnot, but their lifespan isn't too long. So within 10-15 years you'll have a couple of down cottonwoods that again are being becoming part of the ecosystem, but then that's when you have your older or longer growing trees like cottonwoods come in. So all that also kind of helps with trying to we think about that when designing these plans. It's like in that hope that we won't have just a straight line of all oaks or cottonwoods.
Cool. So I know this this sounds like it might take a little effort. Charles was wondering if you'd go back a slide, but this was a ways back into it. I know that at the time the slide was it said Dos Rios Ranch Native Use Garden slide, and this would have been 2 slides before that. Do you happen to see that slide, and is there any chance you could quickly share that?
Yeah, let me
So said
see what I
Dos
can do for you.
Rios Ranch Native Use Garden, and then and this is Charles. So if Charles
The native.
kind of you can quickly take a quick slide. Charles, be kind of verify in the chat that that's the slide you wanted. And that's it. Okay, thank you. Cool. We did it. All right. And back up to the long list of questions. This is Diana, is that the narrow leaf milkweed or is it showy that you've got?
Narrow leaf milkweed, that is our local ecotypic milkweed. So that's the one we use up north. At another one of our experimental sites, we went ahead and used showy and narrow leaf. So it really depends from where it's found.
And you did find monarchs at some point. And did you happen to notice if they preferred one or the other?
I wasn't part of that experiment up north. It's out of our region, so I couldn't answer that.
Oh, I see.
To be honest.
So where you've got them, you've got narrow leaf, and they did bring them in.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good deal. And Diana also said, I noticed elderberry out there when we visited. Was that planted?
We planted a lot of elderberry, but a lot of it has also been dispersed by birds. So yeah.
That's part of the plan. And let's see. I've done these the webinar. Okay. This is Mars again, has the flooding helped your effort in any way?
Yeah, definitely. There's two sides to it. It's very helpful because at the end of the day, like, we're creating these spaces to be flooded. The idea isn't for them to not flood. The idea is for them to flood, slow the water flow down, capture water. So yeah, definitely, I think it's specifically where we had the monarch plots, it's really shown us how successful we can be at establishing plant communities that will do well in flood events if we're able to, provide the right maintenance beforehand so these plants are able to establish. In terms of, I know Diego talked about our native use garden being flooded and a lot of die-off happened, and that was because we had just planted the plants in the November 2022, and we had the atmospheric rivers start late December 2022 and then continue on to 2023. So in that case, when like floodwaters come through, our plants just don't have enough time to establish. At the end of the day, they still need time to grow their root systems before they're able to survive flood events. But at the end of the day, I would say, yes, it helps our efforts because, that's what these spaces are meant to do. And it just feels good to, see floodwaters come through an area and just have the vegetation bounce back up because they're used to it. They should be having that occur on site.
I see. There are a number of questions that all were basically about the same thing. It's basically a repeat of a question up above. Remember when I think Cynthia was asking about saltbush, and the question was, is big saltbush just another name for quail bush? And then Diane Loomis said, is quail bush atriplex? And I believe that Lawrence, who knows this stuff because he also works with restorations, said it was A. lentiformis. So it's Atriplex lentiformis, right?
Yes.
All right, good deal. So there you got your answers. And then Mars also asked, I am also wondering if there has been any bird monitoring at the site and if there has been any improvement over, which was, I guess, was just an agricultural area. So it must have been pretty dismal for a while, right?
The great thing about this site is that we're along somebody correct me if you know, the Pacific Flyway. So
Yeah.
lots of migratory birds use areas like the refuge during their migration routes. And we have definitely seen the increase of bird activity. We have people on our staff that are, trained and qualified to do point counts. And recently, some of the monitoring techniques that we've been doing is implementing these autonomous recording units or ARUs. And because we're so limited on staff and what we can actually go out and do in the field in terms of taking bird data, these recording units are out there recording during a set time, usually the mornings or the evenings, and being able to deploy these it's helping us process the data and see what species are coming through. But I am definitely not, I know it has, but I don't want to speak too much because I am not the bird expert in our team. But we have seen an increase in riparian bird species in the area.
Okay, cool. Now Madeline Yancey, who, do you know her? She's one of our resident experts. And this is more of a comment, the riparian woodland restoration done at the San Joaquin River and NWR, because that's what she's connected with, adjacent to Dos Rios, was also done by river partners using their agricultural planting method. If you walk the Pelican Nature Trail there, you will see that is what he's referring to. You will see what a mature site now looks like. The rows pretty much disappear and the different plant species progress on their own progression. And I think that was in response to something somebody had asked at the time. And then Lawrence has provided his phone number and his email address because he's got restoration that he's doing in Lathrop. So Pond Native Plant Project in Weeding. So if anybody wants to get involved in something like this, they can certainly get involved with that. Charles also asks, and I was going to ask you more about the riparian brush rabbit. Charles was asking, can they swim? The brush rabbit.
They can if they need to, but it's not something that they are great at or would love to do. Hence why when there's these flood events, we didn't want to include an image because it was very sad, but we have worked refuge staff during high flood events where you find a riparian brush rabbit, you know, in a little bush, because that's the closest thing he could swim to in these high water events. So, you know, if they, at a short distance, they can swim and get to higher ground, but, you know, they're not avid swimmers.
I think they're better swimmers than your average brush rabbit, is basically it, right? I think that they have, because we actually had a field trip where we got to check out some restoration areas for the brush rabbits, and they were saying I think they've got at least their feet are like a little bit webbed or some, so they're better swimmers than your average brush rabbit, I would think. And then Diana asks again, what is the ongoing role of river partners versus state parks going forward?
It's definitely, like Diego mentioned, we're finishing the tail end of some of the projects, so we're still in charge of the maintenance and the monitoring happening on site. And you know, state parks is a close partner of ours, so we're always still connected and seeing in what aspects we can help them with, what would they like to see on site, that we can do from our end. But in terms of more like river partners won't be doing, at least currently that I know of, like any new restoration implementations on site. But we're always open to see what you know, state parks would like us to see or would like us to help with, if it works out for all of us, I guess.
And Diego pointed out a levee that was built across much of the site. Was that levee removed or breached in areas, or is it still intact?
It's still intact.
You said that it made big impacts on how everything landed. So did you?
Yeah, and it continues to do so. But yeah, it's still intact and it's still there.
Yeah, it's a federal
I think
levy.
historically there has been some breaches, but yeah, it's still there.
Okay, Lawrence says yes, brush rabbits, the riparian brush rabbit can swim. But they can also drown or get washed down to where no cover exists. And I think this was part of the problem when we were there. What they said was that there were some big flood events that happened, and it was devastating because they had nowhere to go. They had no hiding places because once the water came up above where they normally hide, they were all kind of dancing around together. They became really vulnerable to predation, and it was really sad. And what they ended up deliberately doing was to plant a bunch of bushes up on the higher areas to give them someplace to go when things just got really out of hand for them with the weather. And he also mentioned they get eaten. Diana says, what is the role of volunteers in this project?
So River Partners doesn't have a direct, you know, community outreach program, but we do partner with Tuolumne River Trust. A lot of the volunteer work that we have had at Dos Rios has been through them. But a lot of the work they do is planting our potted stock or plugs. So yeah, a lot of planting. We haven't really had a lot of weed events or like pulling weeds planting and people being able to come back and say, I planted this tree seems to be more interesting to people than pulling weeds. But yeah, it's definitely something that, like I said, River Partners doesn't have a specific community outreach branch. So we always refer them to Tuolumne River Trust or other orgs that we know in the area that have the capacity to organize a volunteer event. And we're, always more than welcome to hear about potential ideas.
I see. Now Charles asks, is there a plan for a different milkweed species in the future? So I guess basically as far as native plants, it's either showy or narrowleaf, and you already have narrowleaf. So if there was something you were going to do different, it would be showy. Are you planning on using showy at all?
Not to my knowledge. And the idea is we haven't found showy naturally recruiting in the area. So at this point, we wouldn't want to introduce it if it's not like from within the watershed.
And then will other pollinator beneficial plant species be planted in the future for different insect species? So I guess do you have other species you haven't planted yet? Maybe you want to bring in new species of plants. You pretty much got just the stuff that you've already found there, right?
Yeah.
And you're just getting the local seed and you're trying to just repropagate it. And so you don't necessarily want to come in and reintroduce a whole bunch of stuff you haven't seen there in the past.
The great thing about heritage growers is that, for example, this year they've been helping us seed scout and seed collect. And there's a lot of species that are from the Central Valley, but because how Diego mentioned, like the Central Valley is one of the most like degraded areas in terms of ag. Like we don't have a lot of these these reference sites where we can go and see like, oh, like this seed is here, but we definitely use like historical records to see what species would have been here in the past. And those are the species that, if we can find them within the watershed, we'd be interested in incorporating more into our understory.
Cynthia, did you want to jump in? You're on mute. You're muted.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that we always end on time, which is at 8:30. So you have 8 more minutes to get your questions answered. However, we will turn off the recording at 8:30, but you can stay and talk to each other, or maybe I don't know if our speakers will stay, but you can stay and chit chat for as long as you like. But if you've got some questions, now's the time to put them in the chat so that Mike can give them to our speakers.
All right, Dr. Jean Knapp is another one of our resident experts, and she says the 1997 flood was what started the San Joaquin River NWR restoration and got the Sacramento River Partners to expand into the San Joaquin River Valley and to change their name, dropping the Sacramento from the name. The Sacramento NWR is thus another place to see older examples of successful restoration sites than the 25-year-old San Joaquin River NWR restoration. And let's see, Diana says, even NPR had a story on rescuing 300 or so marsh bunnies at San Luis NWR a couple of years ago because they were drowning. Then Tom says Louis H. Yang, a PhD, UC Davis entomology. He gives a link to UC Davis. He said he spoke to the group at the Hedgerow Farms annual field day a few years back. He observed that both narrowleaf and showy milkweed were utilized by monarch butterflies. However, the showy milkweed was not desirable in late season because the latex in the sap plugged the larvae's guts. Also, the showy's sap toxins were overly high in late summer. So I guess there's really no reason to use showy. And then Dr. Jean Knapp also says Stachys bullata is a host plant for silver-spotted skipper butterflies. John Fulton. And great comments, but not by me. And then I wanted to ask you why you use the agricultural method of doing the restoration rather than doing something a little bit more natural looking. I mean, is that just a way of I guess it was already kind of agricultural fields, right? Did it just seem natural to go in and plant things by rows, or why did you end up doing it that way?
I think, like Claudia mentioned, River Partners was started by two farmers. So this, the equipment they had on hand, and at the same time, at the scale that we do these projects, they're quite big, bigger than most other restoration projects, which you could easily do most of the work by hand. Started to do it effectively, we have to use these big tractors and do these large plantings and rows to sort of make it happen. Claudia, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, I mean, yeah, I think that's the gist of it. You know, we're always, like I said, we're always thinking of other ways to better the work that we do. So it's just something that's worked for us this far. But you know, it's never too late to start implementing something new or trying something new.
On the map you had the Dos Rios, state park or whatever, and then below that it had Hidden Valley Ranch. What is Hidden Valley Ranch, and is it connected at all? It was just kind of a coincidence that it had that on your map, or
That's one of our current restoration sites. That one was implemented this year. And it just like buds up next to Dos Rios State Park. Currently, you know, they're different. We're still managing Hidden Valley. But yeah, it was just another area where we've been doing restoration work in.
um
Is it going to be connected to, let me ask this question. Is it going to be connected to Dos Rios when you're finished?
I don't know. But like I think Diego mentioned this. All of our projects that we restore, the goal is to you know, turn to a public agency. You know, whether that be the refuge system, the park system. So no certainty yet, but it's a possibility.
and somebody asked about bird studies, but how about insect studies? Have you done any insect studies to see if you're getting more insect, like more caterpillars, more butterflies, moths, things like that, that maybe weren't there before?
Uh, not specific insect studies. We have had interns do we host interns for 8 weeks during the summer, and during those 8 weeks they're able to do a research project. And we have had interns look at insect diversity at Dos Rios. But that's as far as the extent I know. Any monitoring technique, you know, takes up time and staff time. So it really, we haven't had the opportunity to have a like insect specific grant or funding source, hence like the limitation on doing more in-depth studies on that.
Okay, Mike, so it's now time to wind things up. In a moment, I'm going to turn off the recording, but of course I want to thank Diego and Garcia for, Diego and Claudia for a fantastic presentation of an area that's just right here for all of us to learn about and share and volunteer. And also, I want to tell you that I'm talking to the people, the state park people that manage Dos Rios, and they're talking about that they might give a webinar about, about coming to the park and what you would see. And so you can learn about, you now know about the restoration, and you can go kind of see what's going on. So I'm talking to them about coming to speak about that. And I do know that they are definitely looking for volunteers at the state park level. So you can probably go on to Dos Rios State Park and find a way to volunteer. All right, so we're gonna officially say goodbye. But you can stay on if you want to. Thanks very much, everyone.
I will tell you there's a lot of complimentary and grateful, a lot of gratitude being shown in the